All right, today we're going to dive into a literary mystery that has baffled scholars for almost 2,000 years. It's a book that claims to be a secret family manual passed down from Confucius's own descendants. But here's the catch. It might be a complete and total fake.
I mean, really think about this for a second. What's the value of wisdom if you can't trust where it came from? This isn't just about some old book. It's a puzzle, right? It forces us to ask, what's really more important? The historical fact of who wrote it, or the power of the ideas inside? So, the text we're talking about is the Kong Congzi. It supposedly was put together by Kong Fu, a direct descendant of Confucius. And a huge point in its favor is that it's mentioned in the ancient Book of Han's Imperial Library catalog. But, from the moment it reappeared in history, it was immediately hit with this huge accusation that the scholar who found it, Wang Su, actually faked the whole thing. Okay, so let's start digging in. What are we looking at here? A priceless piece of philosophy, or one of the greatest forgeries of all time?
So first things first, what does this book even claim to be? Well, it bills itself as this intimate, private record of the Kong family's teachings. You can kind of think of it like the unreleased B-sides to the Analects. You know, the stories and conversations that show how Confucius's philosophy was actually lived and debated and passed down. If it's real, I mean, it would be an absolute treasure.
Yeah, the history of this text is, let's just say it's been a bumpy ride. The story is, it started way back in the Warring States period. Then it gets that all-important mention in the Han Dynasty library, before it just vanishes for centuries. Then, poof, it magically reappears in the 3rd century CE thanks to the scholar Wang Su, but his peers immediately start calling him out. And that doubt really stuck. By the Song Dynasty, even philosophical heavyweights like Zisi were calling it a fake. And look, the arguments against it were pretty solid. Scholars pointed out that the writing style, the grammar, the words they used, it all just felt too new. It'd be like finding a lost play by Shakespeare that talks about the internet. For a lot of scholars, this was basically the smoking gun. All right, so the forgery case looks pretty strong, right? But that's where things get really interesting. Because if we just put that whole authenticity debate on the shelf for a minute and actually look inside the book, what do we find? Why do people still care? Why has this book stuck around for centuries, even with all this doubt swirling around it? Well, it turns out one of the big reasons is that it's packed with practical, real-world advice for rulers, using the wisdom of Confucius to solve actual problems of governing. The book is full of these little case studies. Here's a great one. A guy named Duke Chunhui decides to build this massive new city wall. Sounds like a good project, you know, good for the state. But he pushes his people so hard, with such brutal labor, that thousands of them literally collapse from exhaustion. The whole state is about to explode over a wall. And this is where the Kong Congzi's version of Confucius steps in. And his advice? It's simple, but it's so powerful. He basically says that true success, true leadership, never comes from making your people suffer. He points to the wise old kings who built things because their people wanted to help, because they felt cared for. So you see this incredible contrast being laid out. You can rule with an iron fist, but it's just going to blow up in your face. Or you can lead by actually caring about the people, which in turn inspires them to work with you and get way more done. And honestly, whether the real Confucius said this or not almost doesn't matter. The wisdom itself is timeless. But see, the book isn't just for kings and dukes. It really brings these huge philosophical ideas down to a personal level, showing how these ethics work in our everyday lives. You see, the whole text is just packed with stories that show these ideas in action. It's all about doing the right thing, what they call yi, and putting kindness, or ren, ahead of your own gain. But it's not just a list of rules, it's really about learning how to think ethically, you know, to get the why behind your actions. Okay, check out this story. It's a great example. A local duke wants to show some respect, so he sends Confucius this massive gift of grain. Confucius takes it, and then just doesn't say thank you? I mean, that seems unbelievably rude, right? What's the deal with that? Well, here's the brilliant part. Confucius explains that if he, this famous wise man, makes a huge public spectacle of thanking the duke, then the duke gets to feel like he's done his big good deed for the year. But by just quietly accepting it, he makes the duke's act seem smaller, which encourages him to spread that generosity to 100 other families who actually need it. He's literally sacrificing a small moment of politeness for a much bigger public good. It's just a masterclass in how to think ethically. Okay, so it's not just about telling new stories. The Kong Congzi does something else that's super important. It shows Confucius's descendants actively wrestling with and reinterpreting the classic texts of their own tradition. They're not just reading the classics and nodding along. The book is filled with these conversations where they're asking tough questions about super old texts like the Book of Documents. They're trying to figure out what these ancient rituals and phrases really mean. It shows this dynamic process, this idea that you keep a tradition alive by constantly questioning it and digging deeper. Here's a perfect example of how the text unpacks these old phrases. The classics mention a ritual called gazing at the mountains and rivers. You and I might read that and think, oh, they're just enjoying the scenery. But the Kong Congzi comes in and says, nope, not even close. It explains this is actually a whole system of state rituals where specific sacrifices are made to the sun, moon, and stars to keep the cosmos in balance and prevent things like droughts. And this is the key takeaway here. The book, whether it's real or fake, shows us that Confucianism isn't supposed to be this rigid, dusty set of rules. It's a living, breathing tradition. It's all about learning how to apply timeless ideas to whatever new problems you're facing. So all of this brings us right back to where we started, back to the big mystery. How are we supposed to think about this book, this legacy that's so full of wisdom but so shaky on its history? 8. This one number, it represents the entire premise of the book, an unbroken chain of wisdom passed down through 8 generations. That's such a powerful idea, isn't it? That one family could carry this intellectual torch for hundreds of years, adapting the founders' ideas to a world that was constantly changing around them. And, maybe that's the real truth of the Kong Congzi. Maybe it doesn't really matter if one brilliant forger wrote it or if it was pieced together over generations. The goal, the reason someone created this book, was the same either way. It was meant to be a survival guide, a way to use ancient wisdom to get through chaotic times. This really just captures the spirit of the whole thing. It's about resilience, about adapting, and about believing that your core principles can help you get back up no matter what knocks you down. And in a way, the Kong Congzi itself is proof of that idea, a book that's been knocked down by suspicion again and again, but it keeps rising because the wisdom inside just stays relevant. So we're ending right back where we started, with that big question. The Kong Congzi is a paradox. It's a possibly fake book that's full of what feels like very real wisdom. It really makes you wonder, what's the true test of an idea? Is it where it came from? Or is it its power to teach us, to guide us, centuries after it was first written down? Thanks for digging into this with me.